Welcome back, everybody, to this episode of the Open Concept podcast, where we are breaking down unnecessary walls and barriers that stand in the way of greatness. Guest today, Elisabeth Derksen. Really amazing to have you. Certified bookkeeper, business mentor, entrepreneur, founder of Infinite Bookkeeping. And beyond bookkeeping, Elisabeth is a mother, a trusted business advisor, and mentor, helping her clients navigate all the financial challenges, optimize cash flow, improve profitability, plan for future expansion with a wide open mindset. And Elisabeth, it's awesome to have you here, currently joining us from Tulum, Mexico. So thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to come and chat with us.
My pleasure.
Why don't I know I couldn't have possibly done an introduction justice, so I would love to turn things over to you and open that up, and you can let people know a little bit about who you are and what it is that you're all about, how you got here.
Thank you, Brandon. Yes, my journey, I think it kind of just happened, and I had to kind of figure the obstacle out from stepping out of a relationship that no longer served me to a client seeking a bookkeeper and me arriving at their office, and it was just a boardroom full of paperwork, and they just asked, Elisabeth, can you take care of this? They hired me as an employee, and I said yes. So motherhood in hand, and that was the beginning of Infinite Bookkeeping. Like I said, they hired me as an employee first, packed 2 lunches, packed the playpen, went, it was around a 20-minute drive every day. And so I got the client completely caught up. And then I realized that I asked them if I could maybe peek into a previous year because I detected monies that they didn't even know they had. So I was able to retrieve $30,000 of incorrect filings for them. And that's when I realized that I need to incorporate. And so with my baby only less than a year old, I incorporated the company, met company owners at coffee shops, and took them on as clients. A lot of people, they are hesitant when they're like, oh, should I be sole proprietor or should I be incorporated? I just went really for the incorporation for the sake of write-offs right aways. And it kind of gives you a push or the drive of if you incorporate, you want to go past that 30K threshold. And I just had that vision, I can do this. I think the next win was very quickly with that particular client is learning how to win for your clients. And that is dissecting each line item and understanding the possibility to do business more efficient and with any industry. So this particular client had me in an office, was paying around $1,200 per month. I'm like, hey, let me save you around more than 10K a year. Move me to my office. Let's close this lease on this rental. I'm not seeing clients in person anyways. So it was a win-win. They got monies in their pocket. I could now have a home office job, and I had my baby near me. And yeah, so it's looking at each client's financial statements, not just in the growth of their finances and like getting a new vendor that is lesser of a cost. Sure, that's part of it if we want to like tighten things up when it comes to the expenses, but it's also attaching the mindset to like, how do we want to create more income with what we have? What is it that one is truly passionate about, and bringing energy into this space, right? So many people, they're like, oh, my expenses, they're too high. It's like, well, you're attracting more expenses just by saying this. So if we can mitigate that and really get in tune with gratitude mindset and be appreciative of what we have, the staff that we have, and really sometimes bring it to the state of like, wow, every one of my staff still has all their 10 fingers. I'm so lucky they can do the front line of my work, right? And so I discovered very early on, Brandon, that there wasn't quite a therapist that understood financial statements and that could calm the busyness of the mind for an entrepreneur. everybody that's jumping in this entrepreneurship, it looks exciting, it looks fun, but it's an ongoing obstacle, and you have to learn how to get really high and loop around them. We just were recently on a roller coaster, so it's definitely a roller
Yeah.
coaster in mind. And never mind being a woman, of the emotions that we feel around business as well. So it's really beautiful to not just view it as a business, but how people feel around it as well. And are you discovering any energy leakages within your business just because you have somebody filled, let's say, in the accounts payable role? How do you even know if the person doing that job is actually even passionate about it? So stepping into organizations and investigating, dissecting who really is passionate about what role is very important, because the moment they're just there for the opportunity of a job, for the opportunity of a paycheck, that's something that we consider an energy leakage.
Wow. So many follow-up questions. That's incredible. I want to go back to one of the first things that you had said, because this was, you had mentioned you were just getting out of a relationship that was no longer serving you. You have your son very young, under a year, and you are moving into this new venture, which is sort of unknown at this point. I imagine there's a bit of craziness, survival mode. There's things that are kicking in. Uh, do you mind? Can we go back a little bit? Can you kind of bring us to a point where, what was going through your mind? Because must have been some barriers there and some obstacles that you were speaking about that would have catapulted you to, or really probably stood in your way. But you mentioned also that there was this drive you had incorporated, which was a new barrier, and that was kind of pulling you through to hit new goals as well. But what was going through your mind when you were looking at sort of starting this new life and this new venture, and not to mention with a young child as well. I can imagine that was a big change.
Yeah, yeah. So I started the firm. My baby must have been around 7 or 8 months. I was then still in the relationship, and it was deteriorating. So when he was 3 years old, that's when my sitter was at my doorsteps, and mother's shaking, and they're like, there needs to come an end to this. And that's when, like, my biggest fear stood right in front of my face. And I just caught myself saying in that moment to her that, like, you're an angel. Because there were some boundaries that were just crossed, and I then just found ourselves a transitional home. But you're right, the obstacles, and I think a lot of the times we believe that fear is an illusion, but fear can actually be the most driver as well. And lately, I give so much gratitude to the visual that I had, that there's no way I will end up under a bridge with my son. And for some reason, like, I now have a knowing, like, it'll never happen. Like, worst case of scenario, even though back then I had trouble speaking about, like, departing from this relationship and so forth. I know I would have ended up at least on somebody's couch, right? But it was this visual that just brought such a drive in me, Brandon, that there was no failing. It was only upwards from here. And even though it was so hard, it was that visual that was a constant reminder from, like, we were on the second floor in that transitional home. Like, I don't know what the neighbors were doing upstairs, but it was always so loud, to the point where I taught myself to, like, self-hypnotize myself so that we could get that restful sleep. And it was every waking hour that I would just get up, roll out of bed, into my desk, and I was just hustling, as nowadays people call it, and to just save up, because not only did I want to get out of the rental, I wanted to buy my first home, my first solo titled home. And so I ended up
Amazing.
accomplishing all of that within a year with him at my side. Um, to just, like, really set that 1 year goal of not spending any monies on things that I don't need. Like, the kid would ask for toys, and we'd have to improvise. Like, there was one moment I remember clearly, he's like, Mama, can we play pool? And we took Jenga blocks, built a pool table, took a golf ball, took some sticks, and we had the best pool table on the carpet, you know? But a lot of shame and embarrassment comes with that because you're on this hidden solo journey of like, oh my gosh, this is embarrassing. I failed a relationship but I'm doing this. And I think there's some I don't know what the word is, but like definitely some self-realizations along the way of like, I can do this by myself. But honestly, had I looked back, it would have been nice to have learned how to ask for help, which I didn't know how at the
Mm.
time. And yeah, that was that. I raised him by my side. I had the neighbors help when I went over to meetings. So it was more of like, who can help? Because daycare is not an option, right?
Daycare was not an option because it was something that you couldn't afford, I
Exactly.
imagine.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's actually another thing I'm stepping into the organization now with. It's called Be Empowered Foundation. Because something that occurred from that obstacle now is on title, if you're making money, you cannot get any government assistance. So even though previously in that relationship, I was making the average annual income, but in the bank account, there was no money. And so because of my notice of assessments, there was no support, nothing from the woman housing, nothing like that. So I really had to grind. And I always prayed, like, give me an outlet and the vision that I can then create something for the women that are losing everything. Um, but no, they have that drive and they deserve way more. So the opportunity, to be honest with you, presented itself a couple weeks ago. Somebody reached out to me directly on Facebook, and we're literally creating a foundation for this. So it's
Wow.
it's interesting, but it's very beautiful when we go through that hurdle of hurting and pain. It really gives a lot of light at the end of the tunnel.
Do you find that a lot of people struggle asking for help? A lot of people that you talk to and a lot of people that you work with?
Um, right now, Brandon, the way how I am, I encourage people. I have beautiful openings that allows the person across from me to curate it into a question. So studying mindset over time and learning how to do so is very important. And the best, I think, on my team and overall, I don't quite notice it as much, but I 100% know that there's mothers out there. And I know, especially from my Instagram followers, because I know there's so many mothers that are not, and I was in that case myself, that are not taking the opportunity to post or even share that somebody's a mother. And that in itself, it's a it's a growing stage, but it's not just, I would say, not just necessarily ask for help in this realm, but know who your inspiration is for somebody that was is a legacy or was your hero. Why I bring that up is because I come from a very conservative background. When we immigrated from Germany to Canada, we were considered Mennonite or Baptist, and so it was that very strict upbringing of no pants, skirts, and very, very, very strict. Um, but what I needed when I went out of that relationship, Brandon, I needed something from the Bible that, like, me
Mm.
stepping out of this is okay.
Yeah, searching for something that kind of felt within your the guidelines of what you knew, but looking for something that gave you that permission.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was finding something that was going to be empowering enough to give you a sense that what you were doing and the thoughts that you were having, the actions that you were looking to take was going to be okay.
Yeah, and I remember I was in the bath and I YouTubed single mother, something in the Bible. It's okay to like step out of a relationship that doesn't serve you. And I came across a story from Hagar, and she was the one that was taken on by Abram and Sarah because Sarah couldn't have children. And after 25 years, well, she had given birth to Ismail, and after 25 years, Sarah eliminated her with the son because of her jealousy. But it was her walking through the desert and trusting the voice of God, like keep going, like a well is going to be nearby. Like when this voice has been with me all along, and it's just so powerful that when we just shift our belief system slightly or even search, like that an answer will come. And it was like, I remember when we drove to Kelowna, like we moved from Edmonton to Kelowna that year after the goal that I set, and not knowing anybody here. And I remember my son sitting in the back of the vehicle and he goes, Mama, when are we home? And that nearly broke me because it was COVID. I had purchased a home on paper. I had to go see it physically, and all I said soon, hoping that everything that I was buying was correct and fine. And so, yeah, I just trusted that voice along the way of like, just keep going, something will be there. And it's been life changing, like the place in itself, the community that I've gotten to know in there. It's just been very, very wonderful. I feel very blessed.
Yeah, it's that's a beautiful story. And this was you and your son, and how old was he at this point when you were moving to Kelowna?
He was 5, 4 going on
Five.
5 in January. Yeah, so 4.
Can I ask you why Kelowna? I know the drive from Edmonton to Kelowna is a big drive. It's even a reasonable flight to take. But why'd you end up in Kelowna? You
Sure.
just looking on paper at a place, or did you know some people, or how did that
No,
work out?
didn't know anybody there. 2012, so I was living in Edmonton. Initially, we immigrated to Manitoba in 98. So in 2012, I drove to Vancouver for the first time and I heard things about Kelowna. And so on my way back, stopped in Kelowna and I was just like, wow, how is this Canada? So I've gone from like minus 40s and 50s, sometimes even both in Edmonton and Manitoba. And I was just like, I was just blown away. And I was just like, this is my dream. And so I was with baby daddy at the time, and I was just like, let's make this happen. And I was always put on the back burner. So then, when it was just me and my kiddo, I sat down and I literally asked, what does Elisabeth really want? And Kelowna is the first thing that came to mind. And I'm like, let's make that happen. And so we
Let's
did.
go. I was born in Winnipeg.
Okay.
So yeah, my I make the joke that my parents couldn't figure out what to name me, so they just looked kind of left and right, and Brandon, Manitoba was right next door. But I was only there for the first 6 months of my life, and I've never been back. My dad had a job traveling around a fair bit, and so we just happened to be there when I was born. But yeah, about 6 months after I was born, my parents picked me up and moved me to the West Coast. Very, very different types of Canada.
Right?
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned there's a lot of mothers follow you, and they tend to be the ones that struggle to ask for help. And my wife being the same. I know after our first child, and we have a second one on the way. I have a 3.5-year-old daughter, beautiful, beautiful baby girl, and another little girl on the
Congratulations.
way. So yeah, very, very blessed and thankful for that. But if you ask my wife, we've had many conversations about it where after our first child, she was worried about asking for help. She didn't want to. Um, and, as much as, maybe people were offering to help, she had this mindset of, no, I don't need that. I can do it myself. And I think a lot of that was because she felt that was, that everybody else was able to do it. Everybody else was stronger. Everybody else, all the other mothers out there, kind of seemed to have it all together, and maybe that was, over social media, you start seeing a lot of that. I don't know. I'm not going to jump into a deep dive into her mind. She'll kill me because I won't well represent her thoughts. But that was something that's certainly come up, and I can and really appreciate where you're coming from.
Yeah, one thing, a partner or a friend, and like Even if a mother looks all fine and dandy, the one thing I always say is ask her, how can I support you? Despite like she looks happy in something, I'm pretty sure there's something that she's maybe either looking to carry out of storage or something is in the back of her head. And that's a powerful question without, do you need any help? Because the word help in itself can feel very strong at times for women.
Yeah. Yeah. For men too, right?
Yeah.
For men as well, for women, I think especially, but for men, definitely, if you're asking for help, it means that you're not capable of doing it on your own.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly in business. You mentioned fear. One thing that you said was fear is an illusion, and I tend to believe that fear is very real. The feeling, the emotion of fear is very, very real, and you can use that in so many great ways. But it can also be pretty paralyzing.
100%.
Fear, what do they say? False evidence appearing real, right? And you mentioned just that the shift in perspective uh, really can change a lot of how you live your life and can change the way that you see things. And you mentioned that about money too, money and finance and business. Why do people struggle? You mentioned they seem to have struggle, or there's energy leakage that sort of comes out of the company when you think about, oh, our finances are never good, or we're not organized. We our staff are always angry, and being thankful for your staff. What have you recognized that happens in a lot of businesses, and maybe with a lot of business owners or people personally that are maybe struggling financially and their relationships with money?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of root discovery there. Um, One of the biggest things people come to and hire a bookkeeper for is they're like, well, I have no idea where all my money goes, and it's the words that we put out there. The universe then automatically is gonna either disperse your monies and that to translate it more real is just you have spent it before you have a moment to even think about what you're going to do about it in a maybe passive income or something positive to retain it. And I think a lot of people, why they are in this is because the scarcity mindset of I don't have enough, I need more. Like I remember myself even shifting out of the consumer state when I started to understand finances myself. Like if I'm out at a store shopping, let's say shoes, I see I'm taking out of inventory. I'm not just buying shoes, right? But then my mindset also goes in the spiral direction of like, well, who's the owner? What was his thought process to put these shoes on the shelves? Or who's his manufacturer? Is it out in China or is it Taiwan? Like it's just this ever-ending creation. And what really excites me the most is behind everything was just somebody listening to their idea and they've executed it. But further to the negative side of it, like why can't people hang on to their money or why so scarce? It's try to discover where are you coming from? What was the
Hmm.
narration as you grew up, right? When you were a child and you asked maybe your parents for money, was there an answer that maybe you heard at one point that like, now I can't, sorry, I don't have any money. So before you're now even in this creation mind or like receiving your next paycheck, let's use the employee example, your mindset almost going in the direction of like, I'm going to buy everything because soon there's not going to be any money. But if you really work at that and shift, first of all, give love to that, number one. If it came from parents, that's the best they knew how. Um, and there's either hypnotherapy, mindset, coaching, like, and really communicate because you're still sitting on pain, right? Because you didn't receive it. You asked for something. It's almost like asking for help, Brandon. It's like you
Yeah.
asked for something and you had this fear of not receiving it in the moment, or like the fear of not getting help, and like to have the response of like, no, I don't have it, or no, we don't have enough. In you, there is this, I created this. I shouldn't have asked. This is my fault. Our family doesn't have money because of me, right? So it's just this unnecessary story that people end up telling in themselves. And some are not even aware. It's just a deep root. You have to go back to like, where was your first conversation around money? What were you told that money is all evil? Like that people that have money, they're bad? Like it's all what you heard initially about it. And then just sit with it. I always say, like, take a moment as if you had that story in your hands. And what if you couldn't hold that story? It's like, well, then I wouldn't maybe have my hands. It's just like you go back to the gratitude of you have the capacity to hold the story, right? So you shift your mindset into this positive. And so now that you have that thought of like, man, I can hold this story, I can look at it again, and I get to change it. I get to be the director of how I want to perceive it now.
I went into, yeah, thank you for sharing that. That was like shot straight to my heart, really, because there's so much going on there. I give a talk at a high school class with a young entrepreneur class, and I've been working with this organization for about 6 years now. And every year I work with a different group of high school students, and I went in there and I gave a talk, and partway through, I asked the class, I said, who here wants to make a lot of money? One hand went up in the entire classroom. One hand went up. And it kind of half went up. And so started asking those questions. And I said, same thing. Well, who here wants to make some sort of a positive impact in the world? And there was about 6 hands that went up. And you got to remember, these are grade 11, grade 12 students. So they're still figuring out what their story is with money, what they're going to do. They're not too sure what the future holds for them. But played around with that idea and started asking, okay, well, why don't any of you want to make money? Why didn't none of you raise your hand? And it turns out all of them did want to make money, but they were embarrassed to say that they wanted to make money because there was some sort of negative annotation around that. And I looked around there and I said, these faces, every single one of you, I can tell that if you had more money, if you are making a lot of money, are going to be able to do great things with it. And we walked through and we talked about what certain things meant to these kids and what they could do if they were able to make more money. What sort of bigger impact would they be able to make if they could change their mindset around money? And at the end of the next 10 minutes, when I asked the question again, so who here in this class wants to make money? Every single one of those hands behind those desks shot up, and I thought it was pretty cool. Just those few brief interactions. But I get it. I mean, even, when I was younger, didn't come from a lot of money, and I use that as a story. I mean, it's a story that I use to help maybe bring some motivation to these kids, but it's something that, that story doesn't serve me personally anymore. It helps serve others. But yeah, I mean, you you go through that, and at these early stages of identifying money and trying to have these conversations, even with my young daughter who doesn't really understand what money is. And you talk about your son, and you talked about the pool table and asking for toys and trying to improvise and making sure that he didn't feel like he was a burden, and making sure that he grows up with a good story of money behind him. And that's a tough balance, because how you introduce these thoughts into a young child so they grow up with a good relationship with money is difficult. And I know even with my daughter, it's like I try and find that balance of, not saying yes to everything that she wants and trying to say no, like that costs money, that requires money, and trying to, but by saying that, am I messing up her identity with money, or am I teaching her that she just can't have everything that she wants because she's, almost 4 years old and wants everything that she sees?
That question. Something that I've started doing is um, instead of saying no, that's costing money, it's also like, let's explore that together. Let's explore
Mm.
that when we're at home. And so it'll be around dinner time, and maybe we'll take out like a drawing material and a notebook. And it's just like, okay, so how much money did that actually cost? Let's say it was $25. It's just like, what can we create today? If it was a product, how many of those would we have to sell to get that? So it's getting him into that creation mindset. So he's all the time, he's so innovative, and it's all the time thinking to create rather than like, oh, because one thing you want to make sure stay away from is the scarcity mindset. Because the
Hmm.
moment they're like, oh, I don't have money, I can't get it, that's lack, right? But it's like, what can we actually create out of this? And so, kids, how old is your daughter?
Yeah, she's almost 4. Yeah,
Okay,
she's
okay.
3.5. She'll be
So
4
that
in
is
August.
that is more of a younger topic. So with that, I would say use the toys, right? Like if she's into Barbie or like self-made jewelry, it's like, well, how many of these do we have to make? And if we need to sell them, how much would we receive? And then we can go buy it, right? To get them into that state of creation versus um, I have to ask when I want something, right? Um, Traveling helps a lot. Like we've been to, I think my son has been to 11, 12 countries now already, and he's only been 10. And what he's noticing is like, for example, these food stands on the side of the road, right? He goes, oh, I can sell my toys that I don't need anymore. And it's like pointing out at these that we so consider like poor or simple jobs, but they're actually needed, right? Um, a, One that he does at home right now, it's he goes, I drop him off at the recycling depot, and it is his chore to go and retrieve the money, and that's his cash, right? But it's him cleaning up the bottles at home and making sure that they're all accounted for.
Where in business do you find, you mentioned that there's this sort of scattered mindset? Where do business owners that are having mindset issues with money, and they are struggling with the idea of saving money, not sure how to spend it, they're losing money in places that they shouldn't be losing money? Is there a sort of a defining moment, or how do people get out of that hole and that vicious circle? I know you had said that you can change their mindset with that, but do you have anything tactically that you may be able to share with some of the listeners, or case studies that you've gone through, or an example that you can give as to how that might help if you're a business owner and you're in that situation? Because I know so many that are.
Well, yeah, it's definitely get somebody in place that you can speak to, right? Even evaluate the bookkeeper that you currently have in your industry. Have the conversation with them of like, are you actually just a bookkeeper, or do you understand the mindset behind it? Like for me, it came very natural, and I was very comforting, or I'm very comforting for my clients when they are either in fear, running out of money, to either prove or give some type of assurance or introduce a negotiation where needed. Um, so it's understanding who is it that's number one taking care of your financials, right? Are they just doing it because it's a job and you're getting paid for it? or do you know that you're getting the value out of it? Find somebody who you can speak about that understands financials and mindset. If you currently are in a state where you can't afford that maybe, or don't know where to go, it's do the self-realization of, I have to get myself down to gratitude. Because it's not just the money itself. I think it's also at times as an entrepreneur, you lose the drive, you lose the motivation. And sometimes people can care less about the money factor right now. It's like, how can I get back into this? I used to be so passionate about this, right? And get back into the state of gratitude. I remember clearly this, we were doing a financial system consulting for this big firm in Kelowna, and just restructuring efficiencies within the systems and their finance department. And the one day the owner, he just calls me and I'm like, where are you now? Or he goes, I don't think I can go in the office today. My team is not showing up. I'm like, where are you? He goes, well, I'm sitting in my truck right now about to go to work, but I just really don't feel like going. And for the sake of not mentioning his name, I'll just say it was John. I said, John, what vehicle are you sitting in? He goes, oh, it's the company's truck. And it was winter time. I said, John, did the vehicle start? He goes, yes, Elisabeth, where are you getting at? And it's just like, John, you just listed me 3 things that you can be grateful for. Do you have the right to complain right now that you are in lack of motivation to go in because you have this thought all of a sudden that the team is not going to be showing up for you? It is because of you the team is showing up. Otherwise, without you, there would be no team. So it's sometimes these realizations that somebody needs just this shake in the head a little bit of like, you have no idea what you have. And being in Mexico right now, traveling is such an eye-opener of like, people living in Canada and not going abroad, they have no idea of how lucky and luxurious of a life a lot of us are living. And it's just, maybe putting yourself into your beginner shoe of like when you were trying to get out of survival mode, or when you were in that obstacle of reminding yourself that somebody would dream to have your position right now. And that's what it takes. The mind continuously wants to think negative, but to have the awareness that no, now I just need to take a moment and find the opportunity that I get to turn this around is the game changer.
Yeah, that's so good. That was, yeah, I mean, that's such incredible feedback. Again, when you're speaking, it's like coming straight to my heart, because I've certainly been there, and certainly in moments you forget, right? You live in you have staff that are upset with you, or there's a client that isn't happy for whatever reason, or you're missing a deadline or something like that. You can come up with all of these reasons why things aren't going well. But going back to gratitude and understanding, hey, I woke up, had a reasonable night's sleep, had breakfast this morning, the sun's out, showed up here, get to do this, get to work on something you love, is something, these very basic things that people tend to lose sight of and forget about when they get caught up in the chaos of day to day. So yeah, thank you very much for sharing that story. I find that bookkeepers and accountants typically don't live in that abundance mindset. I find that it's typically, if you're hearing from your accountant or your bookkeeper, it's not because it's like, hey, we've made a whole bunch of money. What do you want to do with it? What do you want to spend with it? This is awesome. You're typically hearing, oh, hey, you know what? Things are tight. We have a big receivables backlog. We need to invoice. We need to do something. We need to get here. We need to scramble. We need to get more money. And they tend to live, I think, in the past, because what they're looking at is data. right? And data on historical numbers, what's coming up, or what you've gone through, what needs to be done. But it's very difficult for them to live in the future. And I'm not blanket stating every single bookkeeper and every single accountant in the world, but I have found that it is a bit of a trend. And I have some great friends that are accountants, and family members that are accountants. My grandfather was a chartered accountant for over 50 years. I mean, he's 94 now, but he had his last client at the age of 87 before he gave that up, because he loved working, and he loved money, loved finance, loved teaching people about it. But he's one of the most conservative people that I know, for sure. When it comes to money, he's not a much of a risk taker. Very much, his mindset is you make some money, you invest it conservatively for a long, long period of time, and by the time you're 94 years old, you've done pretty well for yourself. That's his mindset, which is great, and it's worked really, really well for him. But I have found that bookkeepers and accountants are looking at historical data. That's literally their job. That's where they spend the most of their time. So how would one that, like, if I had a bookkeeper or I had an accountant and they were tending to have these ideas about money, or they sort of lived in this negative space, can you, as a business owner, have that conversation about them? How do you, like, really move them forward if they don't have that as a trait themselves? Because speaking with you, it's a very different conversation than I've had with other bookkeepers, because we're talking about the mindset of money, just not the tangible, uh, you know, put it here, write this off, basic things that other bookkeepers would probably tell you to do. This is very forward thinking, very future based, very emotional based. How would one, as a business owner, have that conversation with their bookkeeper, or how would you, if you're a bookkeeper, finding uh, yourself in this space, how would you get to the other side of the fence?
You know that saying, you're in a room with five people, you become the average of them, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of the people, they look at bookkeepers as almost like a lower industry mark. And I actually came out of that personally as well, of like, oh, I'm just a bookkeeper and I'm not much. But then discovering what I was doing for companies, what I was doing for owners, is just like, no, like I'm actually adding a lot of value here, and went through like from hourly to value pricing myself. Like that in itself is a big thing. Um, Bookkeepers, a lot of them, they're going through a solo journey, right? They're starting something, and the support might not always be there. What I highly suggest is, before you hire your bookkeeper, ask similar questions that you ask if you were to hire an employee, of like, what is your 5-year vision? And a lot of people, they're like, oh, I have a bookkeeper, she only charges me $25 an hour. And it's just like, yeah, but how quick is she? How many efficiencies are in place? Are you aware that AI is taking over this industry? Is she AI savvy, or she or he? And knowing, like, you as a business owner, are you ahead of the business, um, like when it comes to the business journey in itself? Like, let's say adopting AI, is that all across your industry, your company? And if so, why have you not touched on it when it comes to bookkeeping? You, as a business owner, you need to ask the questions. And I would also encourage, when you speak about they always working in the past, as a business owner, are you bringing your financials to them, your receipts and all of this? Are you submitting that to them on a monthly basis, on an annual basis, and then hoping that you don't have to pay any taxes at year end? Or are you the efficient type that has an application platform where you take the picture upon receiving the receipt, or have somebody in place like an assistant that snaps the receipt so the bookkeeper can actually work in the present? Because now, if anything comes through, they can actually let you know, hey, why are you spending on this? This is way too much. Let's eliminate this. And they can work with you. But if you as a business owner are dropping things on the late and then just evaluate, that's where actually a lot of the frustration comes in from business owners towards bookkeepers and accountants, is because at this point, nothing can be done. Whereas if you're proactive, if you're submitting everything on time, then there's that possible 2 months before the year review and see what can we create. I think it's very fun to be in a space when you are innovative. But I think that is just a talent that people or people are visionaries, or they enjoy this. So myself, even because we just spoke about the past, when you speak about the future and like what can we create. 1.5 years ago, I was on my way to Bali, and I had planned a 1-year trip with my son, and the travels were gonna end up more or less in Bali for several weeks. A week before that, I was at a conference, and a client wanted to onboard me as a bookkeeping coach for their firm that was nearly bankrupt. But in that moment, they already had an offshore team that was in the Philippines, and their biggest point was we're having a disconnect with the culture, with the team offshore versus the one in Canada. So it's detecting the opportunity in the moment as well, which is creating for your client, for your prospect, and for yourself. So my mind in that moment is all like, I'm going to Bali. At the same time, when I made that initial like agreement, yes, I'm going, I had already implanted in my mind, dear universe, give me something that I can create along the way that this trip can be a write-off. Like, to just travel and not create an outlet that you can write off is really a loss of money. And so that one was really cool, because when they told me about their pain point, I said, look, I'm on my way to Bali. Why don't I hop over? I'll visit your team. Who's been on site? Well, first I asked, who's been on site? And they're like, well, nobody. Said, I'm on my way to Bali. Why don't I hop over? I'll meet them in person. People don't want to feel like a number in the company. And maybe that's something that they're feeling. And it worked out well. We discovered energy leakage. We had the more connecting, the moving around, who's passionate more in what department. And it came to the point where employees were even lying about what they were doing. And that was a huge loss in the company, of like, oh yes, I know how to do financial analysis. And when you present them with this task and it's just not being completed, it's like, you keep asking, time goes by, and finally they come back with you with like, Elisabeth, I actually don't know how to do this. It's like, well, I am grateful you came out and, we're honest, but this has cost the company a lot of money. So yeah, it's really learning your bookkeeper before you hire, just for the sake of your books being done. If you hire for that, it's like you're hiring an average cleaner in your home. It's like, are you hiring a cleaner just so that your garbage is picked up, or are you hiring a cleaner so that all the like baseboards and everything is dusted in your home, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of people end up, especially if they have either, I mean, maybe it's in different phases, but there's that difference between buying for cost and buying for value. And that mindset shift is because I think a lot of people, they do want to buy and make purchases and services based on value, but sometimes it's a real stretch for them to afford it, where they balance back and forth whether or not they're being foolish with their money because they need it for basic things like, survival, shelter, food. They're maybe saving it because they're one vehicle repair away from not being able to, put food on their table, and they're going to have to decide back and forth. So it's a lot of people live in that, certainly live in that space, and I've been there. And so some of the decisions that you need to make, and you need to continue investing in yourself and into things that bring a lot of value into your life. But I think it's difficult for people to get past that barrier and understand, okay, logically, maybe it doesn't make sense that I spend this money, but at the same time stretch themselves when they are making investments into them, into themselves, to the point where they know that if they do put that money up and invest into themselves, they're going to run as fast as they can to get a return, and they're going to really value the time that they're and the effort that they're putting into learning. Or maybe it's a workshop, or maybe it's a new website for the business that they're starting. But as soon as they start spending money on it, you would think that they do value money and they do value time. But there is a little barrier there, definitely, for so many people when they look at evaluating cost versus value.
To be honest with you, I think there's still a lot of people out there that don't understand what the meaning of value is versus the cost of the service. And then there's also just the language in itself. Invest in yourself. A lot of the people don't necessarily know what that means. I had to go through it myself, right? What does investing in myself do? What does it mean? And speaking nearly 4 languages, it's like when I don't know something in English, I try to translate it in other languages to then give me a definition that makes sense, right? But just in the English itself, it's learning what is the meaning behind it. What is the feeling behind the word? Like let's just dissect the word invest itself, like to be vested within you, right? And somebody could ask the question of like, well, how can I get vested in myself? Isn't that selfish, right? And it can go down that path. It's like, no, how are you knowing? Like, what are you doing? It will help you grow in all pillars of your life.
So good. Do you want to touch up on you mentioned the foundation that's fairly, it sounds like it's a fairly new thing. Do you want to tell people about that? I think it was very, very cool.
Yeah, sure. Be empowered. It's a foundation where we're creating this platform for support for women that are in the everyday mundane, that are on autopilot. And at the same time, they have this knowing of they deserve more. And it could be, similar like myself, of like, you have made maybe regular money on paper on notice of assessment, but you don't have the support there. It's like, well, where can you go? Where can you ask for help? And this is an outlet that will give the opportunity. We're collecting sponsorships from different organizations to make this work. It's a not-for-profit organization, and we'll actually have I think it's the weekend of April 14th in Vancouver, a first in-person segment on this, and then looking to spread this across the nation.
Amazing. So cool. If you want to send some information, I'll make sure I link it into the show notes so people can find you. Why don't, if people are looking to find out more information and reach out, our listeners, if they've really enjoyed and they want to know more about you, and get clear on their money mindset, how do they get in touch with you?
Yeah. One can easily direct message through my Instagram, Elisabeth.Derksen, or on the website info@elisabethderksen.com. And then for anybody looking for that bookkeeping financial help for their companies, we also have the infinitebookkeeping.ca domain as well.
Amazing. Elizabeth, thank you so much for all of your time today, especially because you're down in Mexico right now. So finding some Wi-Fi and jumping on this call has been awesome. And I want to connect with you next time we're both in Kelowna. It's a beautiful, beautiful city. I'm up there a few times a year. So make sure to connect with you and next time I'm in town. But it's been just an absolute treasure, absolute gold. I know our listeners are going to get a lot of value out of everything that we discussed today. So I certainly have a lot to think about. So I can't thank you enough.
You're welcome, Brandon. It's been a pleasure.
Amazing. Well, have a great rest of your day.
You too. Bye-bye.
And thanks to all of our listeners. Appreciate you tuning in for another episode of the Open Concept Podcast. Elisabeth here. Track her down. Find her. Have a great day. Rock and roll.